Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we're gonna be reacting to.
What if the United States were run like Europe? Let's see. Interesting hypothesis. Let's see what you gotta say.
Imagine this. The United States has hundreds of political parties. Not two, but hundreds. There are four
Oh, that
presidents
would be
running
so
the country.
difficult.
And
I
one
think
isn't even a person, but an
I think it would just look like whatever the EU looks like. It's just gonna be like it's the same thing. Even though you guys have multiple parties, um, voting blocks, it's still gonna be the same drama.
entire state acting as a collective president. And every single state, from California all the way to Rhode Island, has the power to veto any major foreign policy decision, like Trump's order to bomb Iran. Sound chaotic?
Oh boy, that nothing will get done. I mean, not that anything gets done now, I guess. But if one state, imagine Mississippi being able to veto some like rights decision,
But
like women's right decision.
this to me is not productive because
Mm.
it's easy to put blame on different people. Like there's so many people you could point blame instead of like collective blame on like a limited amount of people.
No, like overall, a veto to one state, that would be ridiculous. I guess I say that, but it just kind of shows how ridiculous it is for EU, to be fair. That one country can just veto the whole
No, to
thing.
be fair, EU started with small number of countries and then they started adding everybody in. This is the
Yeah.
United States is like, oh, we united as one state. We agree to the Constitution in these terms and moving
I
forward.
think the origin story of EU is a little different.
It's different.
EU started out as a bunch of they were already countries.
They were already agreeable to.
Yeah.
They wanted to work together somewhat.
But they were countries first.
Yeah.
The states they came out as a one country. It's a little different, yeah.
Well, that's basically what the United States would look like if it were run like the European Union. Now, don't worry, this is not a pitch to turn America into the United States of Europe. In fact, I strongly recommend not trying that. But this thought experiment is a fun way to understand how the EU actually works and why Europe can feel so slow, so indecisive, and well, frustrating. Alright, to make this comparison work, we need to set some ground rules. In our little experiment, the 50 US states will act like the 27 EU countries, and the United States as a whole will represent the European Union. And we'll start with elections. How do Americans actually pick their leaders today? In the US federal system, there are lots of elections. Take someone living in New York. They'll vote for their members of Congress, meaning their representatives every 2 years and their senators every 6 years. And of course, they'll head back to the polls to vote for the president every 4 years. And to keep things simple, let's not get into other elections, like the presidential primaries. That's a whole other level of complexity. Now, if the US were to adopt an EU system, elections would actually simplify drastically. And trust me, that's probably the only time I'll use the word simplify in this entire video. In the EU, citizens only elect one institution directly, the European Parliament, every 5 years. So in our EU-style America, we'd replace all of these elections for the president, senators, and representatives with just one. Elections for the US Parliament. Yes, we are also giving US institutions European names too. And this is where it gets fun, because how the parliament would get elected is very different. In Europe, every country has its own political parties. For example, in the Netherlands, you can pick from about 27 different parties, and those 27 parties are completely different from what people would vote for in, say, Germany or Spain. So if we copy that system, every US state would have its own parties too. No more only Republicans, no more only Democrats. Instead, a beautiful chaos of small local parties. People in New York would vote for their favorite state party, and those results would feed into our shiny new US Parliament, with seats handed out roughly in proportion to each state's population. That means over 200 different state parties in the US Parliament. Yes, 200.
Vitamin water is packed with vitamin C.
Not two. So to make it even remotely functional, these parties would have to bunch together into coalitions, usually between 6 and 8 big ones. You'd have everything from the far left to the far right, with centrists, Greens, Libertarians, and probably a few make pineapple pizza great again movements in between. And then, all of these coalitions would have to work together, negotiating, compromising, and watering down their ideas until everyone's kind of happy, or at least equally annoyed. Okay, so what do we do about the Senate? Do we scratch that completely? No. The EU has something kind of similar, called the Council of the EU, but honestly, it's only similar at best. And this is where things start to get very complicated. Because in the council, people aren't directly elected. Instead, it's made up of ministers from each member state. So if the topic is the environment, then all the environmental ministers from the 27 countries show up. If it's transport, then all of the transport ministers show up. And if it's finance, you guessed it, all the finance ministers. So in our new US model, the Senate will be replaced with the Council of the US. Not 100 senators, but a fluid number of people, where each state sends whichever state secretary or commissioner handles that very topic up for debate. So when transport is discussed, 50 transport commissioners, one from each state, would turn up. All right, now things get even more complicated because, well, it's the EU. The EU has one institution that doesn't really exist in the US. It's called the European Council. This brings together all the heads of state of government, basically the presidents and prime ministers of the 27 EU countries, and they decide the big picture direction of the European Union. So, in our US as the EU model, we'd have the American Council, made up of all 50 governors coming together to decide the overall direction that America should take on big ticket issues. And without their support, the president wouldn't have much power at all. Now,
Wow, I can imagine local government is gonna be squeezed. Like, now that's a lot of work.
Would you say it would be better that the governor would go represent the state instead of the senator in the government, like in this
And who monitors
hypothetical?
the state?
No, the government still acts as a governor, but also like whenever there's like a issues that requires like the interest of the state, it would be the governor to talk
I
about.
think there's a issue with checks and balances in that sense.
But I do feel like the governor is a little more in touch with the people though than the senators. The senators live in Washington, yeah, DC, right? The governor actually lives in the state, so the governor is more in touch.
The thing is that it kind of make it look interchangeable because everyone's there for 5 years. When you're like the Senate, you you have like a ability to do the work that is necessary compared to what the governor does and what does the representative do too as well, because everyone has their different timeline. So I don't know. I just don't think it's practical because someone has to monitor local government. I don't think he can split time to do that.
But that's the thing though. This is not like a full-time position. This is like only when the meetings are called, which is like what every half a year or so. You just go.
So that's including everybody. So you
No, no.
have governor, you have the governor is part of the council. You have the state representative is a part of the.
No, I'm just talking about the council. This council is only called whenever there's like a special issue arise, right? So the 50 governors would just meet up and talk about that.
I feel like they talk right now. They may not have the power to act
Well,
on it.
yeah, but they
do
talk and have the
communicate.
power.
Yeah. Okay. Having the power.
Yeah, having the power to make the decision. Because like oftentimes we do see that the governors and the senators are not necessarily on the same boat.
What do you mean?
Like the scientist, right, and the representative. Was not the representative? Sorry, the senator. What's the senator's name? Scott.
Scott.
Brooks. There you go. I feel like they're also kind of competing with each other because both want to run for president.
Yeah.
So they're like,
What's to stop them from here too?
but they're not representing the same state. It would be like from opposite states at least. Well, because they would. I think we'll get into, but there would still be like the EU that what's her name wants the lady. So they will still be competing for that.
Yeah, because I feel like I don't see how it changes, like getting things done.
I don't think things would get more done because I don't really think that things get done in Europe like that. It's just, I think.
You're saying that you'd be more
in touch.
in touch.
Yeah, more of interest with the people. Yeah, I think it would be less self-interest. I think it would be more interest with because you actually live in the state. You're more aware of the issues in the state. I think it would be better for the individuals of that state.
But right now, DeSantis, he knows the issues of the states, but still he makes decision calls that people question if there's possible corruption too as well. So I don't know.
Well, that's a whole another. Corruption is the whole separate issue.
That's gonna be different. I'm curious how successful this is for the EU in terms of corruption, and they still have corruption still in the EU.
This brings us to the presidents. And yes, the EU has a staggering 4 of them. But before we get into that, a quick word from our sponsor. A few months my brain was set, but that's not the cooking detail. Because full-time job, handle any of and get control of your data.
Damn, he
To
said a
the
quick
EU, the
word.
most powerful
Mhm.
executive figure is the president of the European Commission, currently Ursula von der Leyen. She
There
leads
you
the
go,
EU's
that's her.
executive branch, basically the team that proposes laws, manages policies, and tries to make sure everyone sticks to the same rules. In our new US model, this will be called the US Commission. And surprise, surprise, the president of the US Commission wouldn't be directly elected by the people either. Instead, our American Council, remember, that's all 50 governors, would pick a candidate behind closed doors. And then the US Parliament would have to vote to approve them with an absolute majority. So that basically means no
Oh
campaign rally.
no.
Okay,
Oh
so I
no.
guess the
Oh
thing is
no.
the council, the different, so the only thing the council does is elect the
Yeah. You
president.
take away everything from the people. So the people only have direct impact only on who they put into which let me see, what was it?
Parliament,
The parliament,
the
yeah.
parliament, and I guess the American council, because they would
Yeah.
not have to elect the governor, right?
Yeah. But you don't have
Hmm.
I feel like this makes it like what they call this, like the more educated people have the say to who picks
Yeah, I
the
know.
power.
Yeah, the
And this is everything that what the founders was completely against in establishing the United States of America, allowing for the people to have direct impact to who they elect into these positions.
but by the same argument though, a lot of people don't really know who they're voting for too. So maybe it is better that the educated people are making that decision for the president. That at least they are educated enough to make a good decision for everybody. Then we have a bunch of
But then
uneducated people electing a
then
president for us.
then that sets up a slippery slope because then
It
you
sets up a
have
slippery slope for corruption.
you
I
have
agree.
people in power who will decide, oh, I'm gonna make a better call for you as a
They're
person and get rid of individual choice, which is one of the criticism Americans have of Europeans is how much freedom do you have and how much control your government has. So it's gonna set up a slope where you have now, if in one area you have experts of people making decision calls or your day-to-day life, then what else can
But
you control?
don't you want the Department of Education making the decisions to be educated in education?
Yeah, but they should
Right, you don't
market
have.
themselves. But they should market
Okay, but
themselves
you
to
don't
the
have
people.
people.
They cannot be self-declared experts. If we say, oh, they're just
Okay,
experts, and they take
I
the
know,
position.
but we don't have people voting for directly voting for the Department of Education, the head of education, right? We
But
don't
they do
have
have
that.
to market, like advertise themselves.
No,
Here's
Trump,
thing.
Trump picks it.
I understand that, but still, he is obligated to the people. Where if the people are not satisfied with the job he is doing, they will take it out on him.
Right, but this is the same thing. The governors
But
and
that
the
would be just
parliament.
the governors,
No, no,
the
and
50
plus
people.
the parliament, the governors plus the parliament, because the parliaments have to approve it with an absolute majority. So the governments plus the parliament, they still have to have the best interest of people at heart, because they can get voted out. So it's the same principle. Like for example, right now we have the head of education or the head of transportation, like any of those, like commission. What no, what do you call the in his
Cabinet.
cabinet? Yeah, cabinet members. Here you go. Any of those cabinet members, they're elected directly by the president, right? So this is the same logic. That would be like the president, which we elected thinking he knows the best, he picks the best decision. He or she would pick the best decision for that position. So this
Is he an expert to know who's the best?
we elected him as the expert to be, yeah. So this logic is the same thing. The governors, which we elected, elects is the expert of this people of the state, picks the at least casts a vote for a president. Doesn't mean that's the president who will get elected, but they cast. It's to me, it's very similar principle.
There was a study that goes to show when you have more people participating in the voting process, who actually gets in place into these positions of power. If you have the voting rights of the few to really dictate, okay, how we're doing the leadership, you will see will contradict to what the people, the majority, actually wants. And the thing is that it's important to consider that this is a country of the majority and not the minority. So this is everything they escaped from when leaving Europe to come establish United States, because the previous issues is that at some point you have an issue where you don't have mobility. So you're stuck in your status and where you are in society. And one of the ways to address that is to have the opportunity to allow the many, and even though they're educated, not educated, to have the power to vote, because there's power in voting and making these kind of decisions.
I get what you're saying.
Regardless if they're poor decisions or good decisions, these are things that have to happen in order to for us to test out what is working, what is not working.
I mean, ultimately, that is democracy, where literally
Mm-hmm.
any fool gets a vote, right? That's the
Mm-hmm.
definition. But I guess that is the shortcoming of
Mm-hmm.
democracy as well, that every fool gets a vote.
Because what I see in the EU, in Europe, is you have like very slow progress, slow change, and slow in making decisions when decisions have to happen immediately.
But same
And
thing here,
also,
though. Nothing is
but
done.
I'm just in terms of like understanding how I see how Europe handles things versus how in the States we handle things, because we go through a lot of like maybe bad decisions, but from learning from those bad decisions you can recover and move on. I think in Europe they have a thing where they're very polite in not making the wrong decision, making face, where they're stuck and they're in the long haul, stuck in a tough position where people want to make a choice but they don't act on that choice because of these fronts that they have
Right.
to make.
Yeah, honestly, I feel like,
Like with the gas, with dealing with Russia, the way Europe deals with Russia is very different from how America, US deals with Russia.
yeah, I just feel like we have two different systems, and
Hmm.
honestly, they both accomplish the same thing essentially, which is
It's just
nothing.
very different. Yeah, it's just
It's
a
the,
different way.
neither of the systems really accomplish anything. There's a lot of red tape, a lot of delays, a lot of
Hmm.
kumbaya, holding hands, singing. So even though like the two different systems,
Hmm.
you can rationalize which one is better, but at the end of the day, we kind of get the same result in both cases.
Hmm. The thing is, what we do get is the opportunity to see different models operate,
Mm-hmm.
and we can learn from one another. But I don't think it's like a. It would be easy to say, "Oh, United States can be run like the EU."
No debates, no slogans, just a lot of phone calls and late night negotiations. And of course, the US Commission president wouldn't be the only president in this new system. That would be too simple. There would also be the American Council president, who represents all 50 governors and chairs their meetings. Then there'd be the US Parliament president, who oversees debates and votes inside the parliament and makes sure everyone more or less
But that's normal. We have now, the the VP is the leader of the Senate, and then there's the leader of the House of Representatives too. So that's pretty standard.
behaves. And finally, the Council of the US President, who isn't even a person, but a state. Yes, a state. Basically, one US state would get to hold the presidency of the Council for 6 months, setting the agenda and deciding which topics are prioritized, before handing it all over to the next state. So one half of the year, it's Texas running the show, and the next is Vermont. What could possibly go wrong?
Wow, that's
So,
very
that's our
bad. Oh
brand
my
new US
gosh,
model.
that's
To
very
summarize,
bad
the US
because they go
Parliament is
through
elected
very
by citizens.
different things, different
They
priorities.
care about very different things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Every 5 years. The Council of the US is made up of state commissioners, depending on the topic. The American Council brings together all 50 governors, and the US Commission President is chosen by the same 50 governors. Now, if that's not already confusing enough, let's see what happens when the system actually tries to make a law.
Skittles, anyone?
Imagine President Trump decides he wants to finally impose sanctions on Russia. Under our new system, that proposal would have to go through both the US Parliament and the Council of the US. The Parliament would need an absolute majority for it to pass. Fair enough. But the Council of the US would need unanimity. Yes, that means every single state has to agree. So you can already imagine a state like Wyoming.
I think that's the biggest issue with the EU is the unanimity and the veto. It's like that everybody has to agree.
Yeah.
That slows things down so
I,
much.
I think this is what highlights the biggest problems of the EU
Mm-hmm.
in showcasing, okay, does this work?
Yeah, I think if you
Until
wanna,
they address that,
yeah,
I feel
I
like.
think if you wanna like to make sure that a lot of people, like most of the people, like most super majority, make it 75%, maybe make it 85%, but 100% of people agree. That's just so
But
unrealistic.
do you think that's fair to have people who sign up to be a part of the EU to now make these changes? Like now we're doing these changing the rules essentially.
Well, I think that's the thing. The ones who don't like it leave. I think that's what they need to. Just people that have issues with that just leave. Because it is not fair that one country can hold down the whole continent. That's kind of ridiculous. Imagine right now Mississippi holds back the whole. I think for in this
They
example,
have.
Mississippi's backwardness now holdbacks California.
They have, and they try to succeed from the United
And
States and
and
become
how bad is it?
individual. Is not
Like,
practical. I don't think they can even do that.
no, them succeed, and I don't care. They can succeed. Who cares about Mississippi? But the point is, imagine if the stuff that Mississippi wants to be laws, if they actually, or like the stuff that they didn't want to pass laws as laws, if never got passed because Mississippi said no, how bad that would be. It would be ridiculous.
Also, you have to consider there's also people in Mississippi don't necessarily agree with
What the
their
government,
local
right?
government is doing.
Yeah.
So it's not like, oh, it's okay for them to just secede this, but what about those people who, do not agree with this, but they happen to live in
Yeah.
Mississippi?
With just 580,000 people deciding, nope, we're not on board. And that would be it. No sanctions on Russia. The whole thing collapses. Which means
Yeah,
in this
that-
US
Vladimir
SDU
would
model,
love
the
that.
entire country could be
I
held
found that his
hostage by a
best
single state.
Oh, your
And
besties?
it doesn't stop there. If the US really worked like the EU, you'd end up with something wild. Imagine 50 separate armies. California proudly sailing around with its own aircraft carrier.
We kind of have that with the National Guard. I mean, it's not like army, but it is some sort of military type personnel.
Yeah,
Texas
but I
showing
think
up.
it would complex there'd be more chains of command that you have to
Yeah,
go
that
through,
definitely
or
would-
it would create more paperwork.
Definitely more complex, and I think what adds a layer of complexity
Yeah.
in military in Europe is the language difference too, because every country now has the army, their military has their own language.
Off with a few more just because it can. And maybe Vermont with a single submarine that doesn't quite work. Then you'd have 50 different immigration systems, all arguing about who counts as
It's
a
not
resident
practical.
or how long a visa should last. 50 sets of labor laws. So a worker could be fully protected in Oregon but lose half their rights just by crossing into Idaho. And on top of that, 50 foreign policies, each trying to speak with one voice while saying completely different things. It would be chaos. Okay, so that bit of fun is now over. The whole US as the EU idea is a bit silly, isn't it? The EU isn't a country like the United
But
States.
we do
so
kind
comparing
of
the two
have
directly-
each state kind of have its own language in terms of how they speak. So we kind of have that, but not to the extreme
Dialects,
level. Like,
yeah.
not at the extreme level. Like you wouldn't be able to understand one another.
doesn't really work. So what is the EU then? Technically, it's an intergovernmental organization, a group of independent countries that choose to cooperate. You could say it's closer to a confederal model, where most power stays with the member states, and the central authority, like the EU institutions, can only act if everyone agrees. There aren't really any confederations in the world today, but there were in the past, like the United States under the Articles of Confederation between 1781 and 1789. Back then, the central government had barely any power. Each state was basically independent, with Washington only handling big stuff like foreign policy or disputes between states. The US later became a federal system, which is very different. In a federation, power is shared between the central government and the states. Both can make laws, collect taxes, and run institutions. If you imagine a spectrum from centralized to decentralized, the US would sit somewhere in the middle. The EU, meanwhile, is way over on the decentralized side, where most decisions still happen nationally. A centralized system would be something like France or the UK, where big decisions come from Paris or London, and regions mostly carry them out. And one important thing to remember, federalism doesn't mean centralization. It's about sharing power between levels of government, not piling it all up at the top. This is what I think.
That's
The whole
my
idea
big
of this
concern
video-
is that the piling on the power to the top and not having it being fairly distributed amongst people, because that's where it offers checks and balances. Because if you leave room only for the top to hold the majority of the power, you will definitely have corruption.
was to show you how insanely complex the EU is. But does this mean that the EU needs to move towards a US model?
I'd do anything.
Let's put magic fairy dust on Murphy and Buzz so we can play together forever.
Wait.
No. There are plenty of things in the American system we shouldn't copy. But I do think that the EU should move further to the left towards a
Right, that's what I was going to say. I think not copy the whole model because it's not really practical, but I do think there's some things that, especially getting rid of that veto and anything that requires 100% of agreement, I think that has to go because that's just unrealistic. Cut the countries that would
Yeah.
disagree with it.
And I think they have to be open to that kind of change. Where I think in Europe they kind of slow to make changes, but in the past history we've seen, like for example, the 13 colonies, they move more now into splitting the power between local government, state government to the federal government. So they should be open to change too as well.
federation.
EU is
than
new,
that it is
right? It's new,
Yes, fair.
so they should be open to changes.
now. And there are 4 key areas where I think the EU really needs reform. First, the EU needs to end the veto power for individual member
Agreed.
states. If a policy falls under the EU's authority, then the EU should be able to act without one country blocking everything from
Right.
everyone
I
else.
think the authority is what matters here, right? Because here in the States, like we have foreign policy or like declaring wars is clearly federal government authority. A state does not have a right to declare a war, right? So there's ain't no Florida declaring a war on Cuba right now. That's just not happening. So I think the EU that too, like if the
All they can do is issue a state of emergency, and
yeah.
then to go on
If-
the upper chains of command.
if specific power falls in EU's hands, like I don't know, I'm not sure if that's the power, but for example, setting a tariff, based on the past videos we've done, how I understand it's a EU level tariff, right? Because the EU deals as a whole continent, or at least set of countries. So if it's the EU can set a tariff, then it doesn't really matter what Lithuania wants. They can talk to the EU heads about it, but EU's gonna set that tariff whatever they want, and that's how it should be.
Second, the EU needs a pan-European constituency. In most
And
federal
like Lithuania should not have a veto right to say, "Oh, I don't like this tariff, so now we're not gonna set this tariff." No, the EU decides it. Lithuania can voice their concerns, but at the end of the day, guess what? EU makes the decision.
federations, citizens vote on both local and national levels. Right now, Europeans only vote for their national parties, which then form alliances in the European Parliament. But with a pan-European constituency, citizens could also vote for EU-wide parties, letting candidates represent the entire union, not just their home country. That would strengthen European democracy and give people a real sense of voting for something bigger than national politics. And third, the EU needs to direct
And that's interesting, but I think that requires a lot of education for people, because like it's kind of hard to imagine that the person in Lithuania knows anything about parties from Spain. I think that's a little far-fetched.
elect the commission president, or at the very least, formalize the Spitzenkandidaten
Well,
process.
I think
so it's actually
maybe
enshrined
the
in
nuance stuff, sure, but the things that they share in common, like for example, everyone goes through issues with immigration, so they can talk about immigration. Everyone has something to talk about in terms of labor and being able to find employment in one country to able to go to another country and it being transferable. So they can find things to talk about. It's just the nuances will be left to local government, local state issues,
law, not just a polite suggestion that can be ignored whenever convenient. And fourth, we need to federalize when it comes to defense. Right now, we've got 27 small armies, each doing their own thing. It's expensive, inefficient, and frankly, not very intimidating. But one European army? That would actually look like real power. There are plenty of other reforms worth debating.
The
but
thing
for
is,
me,
what's
these are the
interesting
big
with
ones.
a one European army, the thing is you're trusting that, okay, amongst us, we're not going to fight anymore.
Yes.
And that is done. That we're
That's
together
exactly
tight.
what you trust. You trust that
A lot of trust.
by doing that, you basically make commitment for life.
Mm-hmm.
That because if you withdraw, you don't have an army no more. You have to start from ground zero.
And you have a lot of people right now in the EU that look like they can fight each other still to this day. So it's not practical.
I think you do have a great point. The American states, they did have a little civil war, but that is nothing compared to the European wars that Europe went through. So there's a lot of distrust in your neighbor in Europe. So I think that's a little hard to accomplish. Yeah.
Okay. Guys, of course, let us know your thoughts. Forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Join the Discord. As always, share as much kindness as possible.